The bill decriminalizes cannabis on a federal level and provides for the expungement of nonviolent cannabis convictions and resentencing. But it's unlikely to pass a Republican-led Senate. Cheddar Cannabis reporter Chloe Aiello sat down with California Congresswoman Barbara Lee to get her take on the bill's next steps. Take a look.
This is an important bill and it was a historic vote on the floor. And I was so pleased that finally, after so many years, we included a bill that I authored and Senator Booker authored as it relates to the Marijuana Justice Act. And the racial justice issues in ending this war on drugs is so important. And the MORE Act included provisions of our bill which would deschedule marijuana from the list of scheduled substances. And also what it would do would be to expunge the records, move forward with the restorative justice fund so that people can move forward, get job training, or whatever it takes to get their lives put back together as a result of these really terrible, damaging laws. And then also provide for equity in the business, because we know that this is a multi-billion, trillion-dollar industry. And less than 4% of the licenses right now are granted to African Americans and people of color. So, you know, in addition to all of the other issues in the bill, the racial justice provisions are so important to begin to address systemic racism and to address this war on drugs. In fact, to dismantle this war on drugs.
And I do want to address those equity provisions and those racial justice provisions. There have been some activists who have voiced concerns that amendments added in the 11th hour before the MORE Act passed through the House of Representatives have gutted some of those equity provisions. Do you share this concern?
Well, I tell you one thing. I was very upset when at the last minute I learned that in the Ways and Means Committee there was a provision, an exclusion provision as it relates to existing law around felony convictions. And we have a commitment from the chair of the Ways and Means Committee that as this bill moves forward, we are going to definitely fix that and address that. But for the most part, the provisions of the Marijuana Justice Act were included. There were several technical issues, but this was a big one in terms of the Ways and Means Committee, because they did not take away or repeal that measure of the tax code that needed to be repealed in order for the exclusion to be taken away.
And that makes a great segue to my next question here, which is how are you going to ensure that whatever program does ultimately go into effect for cannabis legalization remains true to the calls you yourself have made to include equity provisions in any legalization initiatives?
Well, we can't ensure it unless the people insist that their elected officials fight for this. I'm going to fight for it. The Cannabis Caucus, those who have really been leading on this for many, many years. We don't intend to drop the ball, but we have to have the public. And I'm so glad that 5 more states passed these laws in some form or another in this last election. But this means we're going to have to be advocates, lobbyists, and engage in political action, because now the MORE Act, of course, is in the Senate. Of course, Senator Harris, Vice President-elect Harris, is carrying the MORE Act in the Senate. And so what I am talking about today is we made a historic vote, that's something that has never happened before in terms of descheduling and decriminalizing marijuana and cannabis. But we have a long way to go. But this is going to take all of us. That's how democracy works. It's not just an insider game. It's going to take activists and advocates. That's how we got this far already, is through the coalition of all of our really very woke and wonderful and enlightened people who understand why this war on drugs needs to end.
You mentioned the Senate, and I did want to talk about that because a lot is riding on these 2 runoff elections in Georgia. Depending on what happens with those elections, what are the odds that we could see the MORE Act or even the Medical Marijuana Research Act go into law?
Well, we're working hard to make sure we win, and let's take first things first, because we are determined to win these elections. First, just not only in terms of cannabis policy, but in terms of all of the policies of the Biden-Harris administration and those of the Trump administration that we have to repair. And so these elections are important in terms of so many of the policies that we have to move forward on in this country for the people. And so, this, among other issues, is going to be extremely important and dependent upon the elections in Georgia. So I'm encouraging everyone, if you're not engaged, please get engaged and help us win in Georgia.
We will, of course, be watching that closely. I do want to switch gears here, though. Do you expect Congress to pass a new stimulus package before the end of the year when benefits for millions run out?
I certainly am optimistic, and I have to be because people are living on the edge. The health and the economic impacts of this deadly virus has destroyed so many lives, and so many lives have been lost. So we're here in Washington, D.C. I'm a member of the Appropriations Committee in the midst of trying to make sure that we pass something that really gives people just enough for the next 3 months until we can get Biden and Harris in to really have a robust stimulus plan. And so what we're trying to do now is just make sure that we have the unemployment compensation extended. I mean, now we want to have the $600 a week continue. It's the latest that I learned. The Republicans wanted it at only $300 a week. We need to have the direct assistance payment of $1,200. I mean, people need money. Our small businesses need resources while they're while shelter-in-place orders and while this virus is just consuming so many communities. They need to be able to stay in business. So there's so many provisions of this bill that we're negotiating. Hopefully, the Republicans will understand why we need to do these things for at least 3 months. But I'm cautiously optimistic. We're here in Washington working on this day and night.
Our thanks to Cheddar's cannabis reporter Chloe Aiello and California Congresswoman Barbara Lee joining us.